G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Sorry that's I'm coming on a little bit late. I had trouble actually going live. I had it all set up last night, just had to hit go live this morning and it just wouldn't load. Don't know why. I've got really good upload and download speeds today. However, that's of no point. We're here now. So welcome. Welcome to this live session, which is all to do with trees and foliage. And in lots of ways, it's a similar theme to the last live session I did, because I'm wanting to trial, I suppose, having my live session topics twice. One I do evening my time and one I do morning my time, because I'm aware that Australia's time zones, where I am, Australia, don't work out very well for all of the world at any one place. So my thought was I'll do a time zone that suits Asia and Europe more, and then I'll do another one, which is this one, which I hope will suit the Americas more. So if you caught this on Sunday night my time, possibly Sunday morning or midday Sunday your time, then it might be a fair bit of overlap. But as I said before, sorry for the late start. I had trouble going live. I had it all set up to go last night before I went to bed, so I could just hit go live, and it just circle just kept going round and round, so I had to reload everything. So enough of that, but I'd love to know where you're watching from. I'm always find that really interested. So, but let's start with trees. Now, a tree's a joy for you or a frustration for you when you draw. Maybe you saw my poll lately that I had on my community page a few days ago, asking people what they found difficult about trees. To my surprise, trees in the landscape actually was the more of a problem than doing leaves or branches on an individual tree. And I think in the end, only 4% said that they didn't have any problem drawing trees. So trees are obviously a large issue. G'day there, me too. G'day, Alan in Dublin. I have half of my genetic makeup comes from just outside of Dublin in Kildare. I have two Irish grandparents from there. And g'day, Jesse, and g'day, Mansion, Hong Konger in Scotland. Okay. Oh, good afternoon, Amy. Thanks. Well, I'm glad to see a few Americans coming in, because I had hoped this was a time that would suit the Americas. But of course, absolutely everyone is welcome. And yeah, not so far away. And if you have any thoughts, questions, experiences on drawing trees that you'd like to even pop in now at the start, that would be great. And I think a big reason we have so many problems drawing trees, well, look, obviously they're very complex things, but I think it's a little more, the reason is more than just that they're hard. And I think trees present us with a particular challenge for a few reasons. So I want to just start by explaining why I think trees present a difficulty to us that goes beyond the fact that they're a complex thing. Because if we draw, we probably have the challenge of complex things reasonably frequently. So why is it trees, and how does that stop us from drawing them properly, or drawing them in a way that we feel is effective for what we want? And what's the way around that? Because there certainly is a way around that, or through that, or however you'd like to work that. But please, if you're watching at the moment, please, hopefully this will help you out. So please help me out and hit the like button for me. That would be great. So, and look, when I talk about trees, I'm talking about all things trees, all things foliage, and not even just trees, excuse me, but all things leafy. Anything from a huge oak tree to grass and everything in between really comes into this. Branches, clusters of trees in the landscape, a forest of trees, shrubs, potted plants even. Hi, Kathleen. Montana, welcome. Hi, Amy. Trees were very much popsicles or triangles in an architectural design course. Well, I guess the architecture is probably the main thing. And look, I think actually architectural design is an area where you can get away with, in effect, placing tree symbols there to indicate something, because the architecture is the focus. And so it's kind of deliberately saying that or showing that. But I think the reason why trees end up being so difficult for us is simply because we know them too well. As children, we grow up with trees all around us. We grow up, if we're lucky, climbing trees, having access to trees, looking at trees, picking up leaves, collecting seed pods or acorns or twigs, making things out of them. Because trees, for most of us, are all around us. As children, we're always kind of using the things that are around us for just to engage with and learn with and play with. And so we're so familiar with trees, which means when I go to draw a tree, I have all this memory and experience in my head. And I think that we have more first-hand detail, firstly, of trees in general than we have with most subjects we draw. And they are complex. And we know how many leaves there are. And I think this is one of the key things, or we know how many branches there are. And so what we know overwhelms and even goes in front of what we're seeing. For most of us when we draw, and certainly for all of us when we start to draw, there's some element of drawing from things we're seeing, whether it's in life or in a photo. And probably in practice for most of us as adults, we draw from photos simply because they're accessible and we can use them so easily and so quickly. So, the problem is that what we see, we know too well. But there's another problem too that goes back to our earliest experience, not of trees, but of drawing. Now, I did this for another reason. I did this for a community page quiz. But these are the sorts of drawings that we probably drew in infant school or even before we went to school, preschool, whatever. And the thing, hi there, Metal Kid, from Brazil. And on the left there, you see the lollipop tree, which is often something fairly similar to how our trees first look. Now, of course, very few trees actually look like that. But what tends to happen is we go to school and we see other kids drawing trees like that. And we go, oh, that's how you draw a tree. And so we draw trees like that. We draw houses like this. Very simple geometric shapes, very flat two-dimensional outlines. And there's a sun, the way the sun never looks. There's smoke, the way smoke never looks. And there's a cloud, the way clouds seldom look, and flowers as well. So what these things are they're not really drawings of trees or of houses or of flowers, because those things never look like that. They're actually symbols. They're symbols that we all agree means this. So the circle with the rectangle, long skinny rectangle underneath is a symbol that we all recognize as a tree. We all give those shapes that meaning, even though it looks as much like a spoon or it looks more like a baby's rattle than a tree. So it's not absolutely based on its appearance. It's a symbol that we all agree. Just as a commercial symbol may stand for the product and have obviously no relation to how it looks. And so we're used to drawing trees that don't look particularly real, is I suppose the other thing I'm saying. We're used to using symbols of various complexity. They may not be as simple as that, even from childhood, to draw trees. Metal Kid, how do I come up with a pattern for a tree? Yeah, Metal Kid. I don't think I've answered that question yet. I don't want to answer that just yet, but it's the same way we draw anything from imagination. So if I haven't answered it in a little while, ask me again, and I will then. Architecture, plans of symbols, etc., is one reason Amy quit architecture and graduated in a Bachelor of Arts. Okay, yeah, all right. So that's our problem. From our childhood, we have these cartoon-like symbolic ways of drawing trees and a lot of other things. And so that gets us used to symbols instead of realism. And then we kind of want to keep using these in some way as we start to draw. Now, what I see happen, the two and what we know about trees gets in the way of drawing what we see. So knowing there are so many leaves, I go to draw. And the other thing about our earliest experiences of drawing is they're very outline dependent. Now, that's fair enough, because as kids, firstly, often we can barely hold the crayon in our hand. So outline is fine. But outline for most things requires incredible simplification. But it's also what we're seeing on cartoons, in children's storybooks. So we have this sense that drawing is outline. We draw around the shapes, and that's okay. So we either hyper simplify complicated shapes, such as a tree, or what do we do with it? Well, we want to start drawing leaves, and sometimes children do draw individual leaves, and of course it's no more realistic a looking tree as the total symbol, because the leaves are out of scale and they become symbolic leaves anyway. And I think these symbolic leaves kind of continue through at the back of our head. And I remember an art teacher once saying to me that people keep saying, how do I draw leaves? How do I draw leaves? Show me how you draw leaves, as if there's a way of drawing leaves. There is no way of drawing leaves. There's a way of drawing things that we're looking at, regardless of what it is. And so the way we draw leaves should be the way we draw everything. We look at it and we work out how we're going to capture that in our drawing. But there's a part of it that says, tell me the way that you do this. And what usually happens is people see leaves and they start to do kind of an outliney sort of thing that's, in many ways, it's almost like a continuous line that suggests leaves in some way. It becomes confusing and laborious to draw, and ends up just often being a squiggle that just creates various values in a sort of curvilinear way. And it's just that, it's a pattern. And the thing about a pattern is patterns are very two-dimensional. They're very flat. And, well, they just don't look real. And I see drawing after drawing after drawing of patterns for the leaves. I also see branches that bear, and trunks that bear no relation to the branches of any particularly real tree, that are often more just like snakes in all sorts of ways, and that don't necessarily match up in terms of thickness with what could be possible for a tree. So we have all these problems because we look at our photo and go, oh, a tree. We go, I know what a tree looks like because I'm so familiar with trees. And I start to just draw trees that are really based on my imagination, but not even necessarily a good imagination. They're not just my memories of trees that I've seen, but they're memories of trees that I've drawn in the past, or I've seen drawn in the past. So part of me is thinking, oh yeah, you draw trees this way. I've seen people draw this tree. How did they draw the leaves again? How did they draw the outline of the tree, and so forth? And so we're not actually looking at and remembering just the reference that we have, but we're actually digging into our imagination, dredging up memories, experiences of trees, and of drawing trees, and of other people drawing trees, all of which is incredibly unhelpful, but often very much we don't realize we're doing it. So what do we do then? Okay, so what's a better way? What's a better way of drawing trees? And can I say, I have a Drawing Trees and All Things Foliage playlist. It has a lot of videos on it now because I draw trees a lot. But it's not just leaves, it's branches, it's different types of trees. It's palm trees, it's fir trees, it's pine trees. It's trees in bunches, trees in landscapes. It's trees in pots, it's potted plants, it's grass, ground, everything. So consider checking out that playlist. My better mindset came when I first began to draw, and I was drawing in pencil, and I was drawing streetscapes, architecture, buildings, but there were often trees, and so I'm drawing the trees with the pencil. I was trying to draw with a line. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to just sort of do fuzzy things, and I've got it. Before I drew, I actually painted for 10 years. My drawing is fairly recent. Most people would think that you would draw somehow as a starting point. If you were going to learn to paint, you'd learn to draw first, perhaps. I learned to paint first, and I painted large oil paintings of Australian gum tree canopies. And it was in doing this that this was the sort of thing and the sort of size I was doing. If you didn't see it the other day. So big. But my point is that when you go to paint a tree, you've got a paintbrush that might be this thick. You go from one extreme to the other. You go from a pen that's this thin to a paintbrush that's thick. And especially with a large tree on a large scale, there's no way you can even think about leaves, because you can't paint an individual leaf. The tree is too big. The tree is too big. And so I realized what I was doing in the painting was I was looking at the color and the value, the lights and darks. And so whether the color was bright or a deep color, a bright color, pale color, or whether the color was, and also whether it was light in value or dark in value. And by juggling all of those things, you end up capturing the overall value of the tree, the lights and darks and the colors. And that's what creates the effect of the leaves. And I realized very early on in the painting, because I think it's easier to see and to understand with the painting, I cottoned on pretty quickly that I'm painting the overall effect of the leaves. I have a drawing somewhere. And I had it right here when I turned the camera on. Maybe it's still is in this part here. Where did I put it? Oh, it is. Nope. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I'll find it when I turn the camera off, I guess. But it's basically a tree, but there are circles, there are spheres and kind of ovoid shapes instead of the canopy, and it's just to represent the fact that that a lot of trees, particularly Australian gum trees, instead of having one big canopy of leaves, they have often lots of smaller ones connected with branches back down to the trunk. And each of these can well, like the one I just showed you actually, each of these little bunches of leaves catches the light in certain ways, has some in light, some in shade, and often casts a shadow on the branches and the other clumps of foliage further down. And it's capturing this in a three-dimensional way that creates our trees. This is a fairly simplified drawing of a tree, of a gum tree I did, but you can see how we've got the clumps of foliage that then have the branches coming down from it, and the branches run into thicker branches till they run into the trunks of the tree. And that on the far side of the tree canopy, there are some clumps of foliage that are totally dark because they're in shade from our side of the tree. Hi there, Claude. Trees have come a long way in beautiful Southwest Michigan's. Thank you. Yep. Alabama, welcome. Yep, welcome everyone. So what I began to see that I needed to do in my drawing was to see the clumps of leaves as a shape, not as clumps of leaves. I had to not think that they were leaves. I had to think of them as shapes that had a certain surface texture and collected the light in certain ways. And I found that by doing that, by disconnecting what I knew about them, it let me see what I was seeing, and then on its own merits, try and find marks to capture it. Now, another unfortunate thing that comes with trees is, from when we're kids, is the process we learn to draw trees, which is, basically, in terms of the leaf part, we draw the outline of the canopy, and it doesn't matter whether we're drawing a super simplified one or slightly more complex. We end up just drawing an outline for the canopy, and so we end up with this heavy black line, which again looks like I've cut out a sheet of cardboard and stuck it on the paper. It creates a heavy line where in life there isn't one, because if anyone can look out of a window at a tree, what you'll see that we don't have a heavy black line around the outer edge of the tree canopy. That's not what we see. That's not the effect. That's not the visual effect of the form of the tree, and particularly with light on it. It's not like that. It's not so black and white, if you like. And so when I draw a tree canopy, when I do the foliage at the top, I don't want a heavy outline, because at the top, it depends on the tree. And we should always want the drawings of our tree to look like the tree that is our reference. We don't want to draw generic trees. We don't want every tree looking like a tree, but looks like every other tree. We want to capture the characteristics. It would be like drawing people who all look the same, and we don't bother to try and capture the actual features of individual people. It's a bit like that, I think, with trees. We want to capture the way the branches form and grow and attach and scale, and the way the leaves are and all this. But usually what happens is at the very top, the top leaves often they drop down, but they often angle out to the sides too. Certainly gum trees are like this. But when you get to the leaves at the bottom of the canopies, of these little clumps of foliage, they're hanging straight down. And so again, it does depend on the leaf shape. But for Australian gum trees, which are mostly long, relatively thin leaves, you get this very jagged zigzag effect. And so we want to show that at the bottom of the leaves, we do get some sort of hanging leaves that create a different effect to what we get at the top. This is actually the same. This drawing used the same reference as this one, but this one was drawn in half the time. I think I was showing the difference in that video between, well, the amount of time that you spend on something, and therefore the different choices you make. But again, you look at the branches. I've worked hard to get the twists and turns and the change of directions of gum tree branches. Gum tree branches, as they grow, often break. And when they break, they get a new growing bit comes out on the end. And as that branch keeps growing, but with a new part to start, you often get a sharp angle that, as the tree, 50 years, 100 years later, is still shown in the branch, this 90-degree bend. And so you want to capture that feel. We don't want lots of slithering, snaky branches, unless that's the habit, unless that's the way the branches look on that particular tree. So, we don't want that. The other thing we need to bear in mind with our trees is that they look different according to how far we are from them. The amount of detail we see changes. Now, that's obvious if we think of a scene such as this, where we've got some trees close. We've got a few bits of trees or branching coming in very close here. And then we've got trees that are much further away. And so the way we draw them, what we draw, what we try and draw changes. I've got this. This again was for another video, but for something else. But on the left, you can see 3 trees that you kind of look at these and you think that they're in a row in a straight line going backwards, probably, but it could just be, in fact, that there are 3 trees next to each other that are just different sizes and they're growing into one another. But when we look at these 3 trees, we don't get that same feeling. We very much know and get a stronger sense that this tree is closest, this tree is a bit further back, this tree is the furthest one of all. And it's not just because they're getting smaller, but we've changed the way we're doing our marks, and we've changed the amount of detail that we put in the trees that go further back. Now, I've done that with, in effect, the adult version of the lollipop tree. I mean, I was deliberately simplifying the tree form, although you can find there are trees like that in the world, not particularly in Australia, but they're certainly around. But it was really to demonstrate the creation of the effect of the depth with trees. But notice that the amount of detail changes. Look at the, if you like, the silhouette edge of the tree. Silhouettes are always very important when we draw, because particularly if there's a strong value contrast, if what's behind the silhouette is light and the silhouette surface is dark, or vice versa, it really stands out. And therefore the brain pays attention to it. The brain, when people see it, really notice those things first. So we want to make sure that they say really helpful things for our drawing, that they tell us really important things about what the subject is, how far away it is, what shape it is. If it's a tree, maybe even what sort of tree it is. We want to make sure that happens. And so it's not just, I had a question asking me about different types of trees. That's not a spruce, but it is a fir tree. This is more your lollipop tree. But I did have, I think that's still a fir tree. I do have some other trees here. I just can't find them. That's a pine tree. That's a gum tree, that one. Yeah, pine tree, gum tree. And here's some palm trees. The palm tree is another tree that has really suffered. From the way cartoons and childhood memories have drawn them. So palm trees, often you have the long, thin trunk, and you have these fronds that come out. But if we look carefully at how they're actually, as they come out, it's always horizontally. None of them come towards us, and I always try to imagine, if I'm looking at a photo of a tree from the side, what the tree looks like if I were to be above it and look down. And a lot of trees are drawn as if all the branches just go off in one direction from the trunk, instead of the fact that they come out in like all directions. It's like they just come out on the horizontal plane. And that's a really common mistake. When we draw trees, if possible, to the degree we can, we do want to create the impression that some of these branches are coming out towards us. And it's interesting, we often, if we're trying to create a sense of depth, we often we often don't realize that the closest bunch of leaves, I mean, if we're thinking of this effect, and want the closest things to be darker and perhaps darker lines and perhaps a bit more detail with the line work, that the closest bunch of leaves might actually be these ones here. In fact, on a gum tree, it often is, because there are branches coming out towards us, which means the leaves on the and they can be very long and spindly, which means the leaves on the very end of this branch, say, coming towards us, is a lot closer than this one or this one or this one. It also means that across here is closer to us than up here. And therefore, we might just want to adjust our lines to help show that. But it does depend a bit on the scale of the tree. So we get a small tree, like a very small tree, such as this one, and the difference between close and far is not so great that it's particularly something to want to accentuate too much. But have a look at the edges. Have a look at the silhouette edges of this. I mean, this took me 15 minutes to draw. A really quick gestural sketch of a very small tree, and I've got dots at times to indicate individual leaves. But if you look close at it, well, of course the tree doesn't look like that, and of course the tree doesn't look like like this isn't a literal drawing of the tree. These are marks that put together, I hope, will capture the feel, the effect of the tree. And that's not just the tree, but it's that particular tree. It's that tree in that particular light. Light is incredibly important for creating the sense of a tree, and particularly the three-dimensional sense of a tree, because how different parts of the tree look are different according to how close they are or how far away they are. If you're finding this helpful, please hit the like button for me. That would be great. If anything looks flat, Metal Kid, whether it's trees or other things, then usually we have an unhelpfully heavy outline style, and we're also not hatching in a way that creates a sense of three dimensions by controlling how much we hatch and choosing what direction we're hatching in. And if you look at the leaves underneath, you see I'm wanting to show that this tree is growing out of some other shrubs on the ground, but they're different shrubs, and so I've used different marks. Metal Kid, look, I have a playlist on hatching that really is much more than I can do now. I can't really demo. I can't get a pen and hold a bit of paper. I can't really demo in a live session. But if you look at my cross-hatching playlist, you'll see. But equally, if you look at my tree playlist, you'll see me cross-hatching trees. So either way, find the thumbnail with the tree that you want to watch me draw and hear me explain the process, and watch that one is probably the best way. Yeah, Ocean Man. Yeah. And look, I think that's going back to what, I don't know if you were here earlier, but I was talking about the unhelpfulness of our childhood memories, of our childhood symbols for drawing things, which particularly includes trees, and how it actually, and so we either go back to symbols, or we're influenced by symbols, and we're influenced by heavy outline tree drawing techniques from our youth, or we go the other way. We get overwhelmed with our memories of all the real life detail of trees, and that almost paralyzes us because we don't know how to draw, particularly when our drawing comes from a sense of when we draw, we're outlining shapes. And it's interesting. Look, I just grabbed a few. Now these aren't tree drawings, but I just grabbed a few of my first YouTube drawings, just to show you how my drawing style has changed in general. So this is an early one, and like there's nothing wrong with it, but I think it shows a much stronger emphasis on line, on outline in shapes. Now, architecture obviously does lend itself to being viewed as a series of shapes, but we don't want to end up, and I think that's helpful, but we don't want to end up, when we actually put the ink on the paper, overemphasizing the shapes too much. Because, here's another one. And that if I accurately outline the shapes in the references, that will make a successful drawing. And what happened was, it was actually, but you know, this is a little bit later. This was also when I was doing much larger drawings for my YouTube videos, but I had to speed them up to like 8 times drawing speed, which I realized was pointless. So I stopped doing drawings so large for my demos. But if we look at, here's one of my latest drawings. This was the second last video I did the other day. You can see there's a much softer feel. I'm trying much more to find marks to create effect, even with buildings. It's not about outlining outlining the geometric lines accurately, although we want the proportions, we want the shapes, we want the perspective angles to be accurate. But it's about capturing the visual feel of what we see. It's getting the emphasis in our drawing the same as the emphasis in life. What stands out in life, we want that to stand out in our drawing. We don't want to create a drawing where our marks emphasize something in an unhelpful way. I think maybe the easiest example to think of, I don't have an example here that I can grab my hands on easily, but an example to think of is bricks. Who's ever drawn a house, started drawing some of the bricks, didn't know where to stop, finish up drawing all the bricks, and when you look at the drawing, all you can see are bricks, and you almost can't see that it's a house, and the windows and the doors get lost. Has anyone ever done that? Anyone ever done that? And maybe you've done exactly the same thing with the tiles on the roof. And so the whole thing is just a checkerboard. I just saw what I was trying to find earlier. This was my simplified gum tree. This was a simplified version of trying to understand what happens here in real life in a tree. In my mind, I could have simplified this some more, but I simplified this. Sorry, this is how I simplify trees that I see in a reference in my head before I start to draw it. Now, I don't just do it like randomly. I try and use the actual structure of the tree in the reference, but this is what I'm thinking. This is the effect I'm trying to create. And you can see that, you know, some of these clumps of foliage are on the other side of the tree. And we also see that some of them have shadows, some of them have shade, but they also have shadow on them from a clump above. And shadow is darker than shade. And so these are things that it's handy to know, and it's handy to use. I just talked about doing bricks and stones, and someone said, yeah, they had that problem with castles. Look, this is another very recent one. Now, this is a small stone tower, and this is just harking back on drawing the effect of detail. So we're not doing trees at this point, although there are some trees in the background. But it's about trying to capture not just the accuracy, but also something of the feel with our lines. And you can see that with the stones, there are parts where I haven't drawn all the stones, but parts where I have drawn, I've firstly, because we're quite close and because the blocks of stone are very large, in most of the places, I've actually drawn 2 lines. I've drawn the 2 lines that shows the mortar in between, instead of just simplifying it to 1 line. So that creates a little more realistic effect. But I haven't used the same weight of line. I've deliberately worked it so that some of the lines, parts of some lines are light, some are darker. I've got little gaps, I've got dots instead of lines in places. And all of this, if you like, diffuses the overall effect. Because when you look at this tower in real life, you can see the blocks easily, but they don't overwhelm the structure. Now, this is the last drawing I've done. You probably haven't seen this video, but this is a little stone church that I drew last night. And again, it was like the tower. When you look at the church in life, you certainly are very aware it was made of stone blocks. So I wanted that to come out. I didn't want it to look smooth, cement rendered. But it was, how can I make the marks to capture the feel of this without having them visually overpower the church, so that all we see are the blocks. And again, you can see I've done the same thing, but more so with this than the tower, because this is a larger building and it moves further away. You can see how I've reduced the amount of detail as it moves further away in exactly the same way. I'm just trying to find our three fluffy trees here. Where did I put our fluffy trees? Oh well, hopefully just for people who came in late, I had three fluffy trees. Oh, here they are. So just as you can see how those trees on the right, I changed the way I drew to help give the sense of distance. I've done the same thing on the right-hand side of the church here. So how do I make bricks look less sharp? Even without sharp outlines, they still look sharp. Look, I don't really have any house drawings here because I've got thousands of tree drawings all around me, and the couple of house drawings that are here are actually weatherboards, so they don't have bricks. I'm just having a quick flip, but actually that's not what I wanted. Oh, yeah, here's one with, here's one with bricks. If you haven't hit like, do you want to do that for me? That would be great. Yes. Oh, hang on. I got a cup of coffee at the door. Oh. My dear wife has just got up and made me a cup of coffee. I don't know how to make the coffee machine. I haven't learned, so I have to have them all made for me. Aren't I a lucky guy? Look, this is a little bit messy, this one. Okay, me too. I'll see you next time. Look, but you can see what I've done with the bricks there. Now, look on the right-hand side. This building is, the right-hand section is closer, so there's sort of more detail of the bricks. Bricks are like leaves. It's important we get the sense of scale correct. If we make the bricks too large, it can make the building look smaller, or vice versa. So we need to get the sense of scale. I find the horizontal lines have to match up to the perspective angles. But you'll notice that I've done very few vertical lines, because in the reference for this, the horizontal lines were the really obvious ones. And it's actually hard to do the vertical lines so that they end up all looking vertical. If you look at the one next to it, in the next building along, I've done even less. And then if you look in the third one, I've just got a few dots and I've got nothing on the last one. And so again, it's like those trees, and I've lost them already. Oh goodness, too many drawings here. I'm going to spill coffee on them all. You watch. If I do that, you'll know. Yeah, but like, here's another, back to foliage, but here's the house, but this is a weatherboard house. But again, look at the different look at these hedges down there. I know it's a hedge, but I'm not trying to draw leaves. I'm looking at, it's almost like I blur my eyes at the reference or at what's in front of me. And I just try and see the lights and darks because I want to capture that. And again, look at the top of the hedge, the silhouette, if you like, of the hedge. And of the other foliage. I mean, look at the very different marks for the leaves of the tree overhanging. Now, again, I haven't tried to draw those exactly, not at all. I've probably taken more care with the branches to try and give them a sense of realism. Again, this would have been probably a 20-minute drawing is my guess, just looking at it. So it is quick and gestural, but even in a quick drawing, we can create, if you like, a soft feel. Things end up looking overdrawn when we try and draw the exactness instead of trying to capture the something that's just more the feel of what we're looking at. And can I just show you too? This was a super quick. This was like a 10-minute drawing. Now, I actually really like this. Like some of my drawings, I was going to say that. No, I'm not going to say that. But it is really helpful as a developing artist if at times we push ourselves to take a lot more time or a lot less time in our drawing than what we normally do. We would all have a different rhythm in our drawing. And we would all end up with it from each other, and we all end up probably with an average drawing time that comes from a lot of different factors, how much time we have available and our temperament and what sort of things we like to draw. Whether our average drawing is 10 minutes or 3 hours, or whether it's 2 3-hour sessions, is probably for each of us relatively consistent, and it can be very helpful for our drawing development to shake that up sometimes. If I normally draw, say it takes me an hour to do a drawing, then it can be really helpful to say, I'm going to complete this drawing in 15 minutes, 20 minutes max. And it can even be helpful to redraw something that took me an hour to draw, to then say, okay, so today I'm going to draw the same drawing in 20 minutes, to force myself to see it differently and to explore different marks, and maybe not to get so hung up on things being exact, because I have to put my pen down when time's up and I have to finish it too. This can be if you've never done it, it can be a tremendously helpful way of stirring things up and discovering new ways of doing things, and sometimes getting rid of some bad habits. And because we're doing it so much faster than we would normally do it, if it looks like a mess, well, it was just a bit of fun. And so it's maybe not such a big deal to us. But, if you look at how simple the trees in the background are, and yet I think I've quite effectively worked a difference between these closest leaves, where we can actually have a sense of leaves, and these trees in the distance, and this foliage that's here, which is much closer. And there is actually a weed under the seat as well. And so it's got nothing to do with how much detail we show or how much time we spend. We can use marks if we're in a very short time frame, or if we have a lot of space I think I'm meaning to draw in. Let me just have a quick look at Metal Kid likes them. So do I make more noticeable bricks darker? You can. And if you do, consider whether you do the lines horizontally or vertically to sort of hatch in some value. But my advice would be do less and do them lighter than you think. You can always do more and make them a bit darker afterwards if you want. How do I get different tones? Some of the lines look more grey, while others very hard black, very light touch. Michael, yes, sometimes it's that. I have a little trick that I use that I do talk about in the videos, often when I do the voiceovers, and that is that I use They're all covered by my drawings. Where's a pen that I use? Let me just show you what I draw with. Here we go. I use Copic multi-liners, not because they pay me. I wish. I just happened, these were the ones I happened to buy and start to use when I decided to stop using pencil and experiment drawing with ink. And I like these because you can like pull all the different, you can replace the nibs, you can replace the ink inside. So I always have some spares so that I won't be caught short without a pen of a certain size. But I have a couple of kind of barrels of each of the sizes that I use. And what I find is that when the pen, either when the ink starts to sort of run out, and it's probably just as much as the nib starts to wear, I find that the line gets a little patchy, gets a little less even. Now, the problem is it can sometimes blotch a little bit at the same time, especially at the start of a line, but you can be aware of that. What I find is that it's a pen that's like 3/4 gone. It gives very different marks, creates very different effects on the paper than one where I've just replaced everything. So I tend to have one that's flowing freely, and then I have one that maybe someone else would have already replaced the nib and put more ink in. But I like the variability it gives. And sometimes I will use the patchy one to, in my initial sort of mapping out work with the pen where you can't erase anything. And then I'll use the juicier one, as I think of it, to do my final marks. But sometimes my patchy pen marks will be my final marks because I want them to be less. So it's all about manipulating our what we use. And this is why I say, find a brand and stick with it. Not because it's saying it's going to be the best brand, but we learn how to use. I mean, every brand handles differently. They feel different in our hands. The weight, the balance, how they sit. Every pen is different, and particularly when we're starting, we don't want to have any variables that we don't have to have. We want things to be as predictable as possible. And so once we find a pen that seems to suit us, stick with it and learn to really use this pen, this brand, this type of pen well. I have different ink delivery systems, and all this affects the way the ink looks on the paper. So we don't want all these things to be changing every time we just pick up a random pen to draw. So that's my advice too. Yeah, of course it's okay to use the same pen. If I use and I often do just use the one pen. It was just a little tip about, not rushing to throw pens out or to stop using them, because we can use them as if you like, a different type of pen to create a different effect. The bench looks peaceful. It was a nice spot. Yes, I did sit on that bench briefly. We were with a family group walking past. So, Zapil, I'm starting architecture school today. Congratulations. Where is the school? What country are you in? What tips can I give? It feels so hard here. Oh, look, believe in yourself. If you want to do it, you almost certainly have it in you to do. That's my advice. I don't know whether you're talking about all of architecture or just about the drawing, the freehand drawing. I have become aware that in architecture, freehand drawing of the architecture is coming back into courses. That when I finished school in the mid-70s, and computer assisted design had just come in, and so hand drawing suddenly looked old-fashioned, and all the architecture businesses, they all wanted the computer look, because that looked cutting edge and technological and things that were very highly considered in the 70s. And but what goes around comes around, and now that everything's sort of computer and probably AI computer design now, architectural firms are wanting to see the hand drawing again. That's seen as a prestigious thing, to have architects in your firm who can do freehand sort of graphic realizations of the architecture and projections and stuff. And so, look, freehand drawing is a great skill to develop. But I'd love to hear where you're doing it. Zappy. I usually say that using different pens for nature drawings, is it okay to use a single one? Yes, look, it just depends what effect you want. If I talk about using different pens, it's only in order to create the effect we want. So here we have a lot of trees, but you can see that, I mean, I want the mountains at the very background to feel very far away. So I've used a different pen. I've used a 0.3 millimeter pen for just down here. And then I've used a 0.2 for kind of like here and here. And then I've used a 0.1. So I've used different pens, and because different pens give a different effect. Now, if I was using the same, if I just had one pen, or I couldn't be bothered changing pens, then I'd do my best to do as light a line along the top as well, and to simplify the detail that I'm drawing. And even like down here, there's more detail here than there is here. Now, the other thing you'll notice, and this is a fairly important thing to talk about, is that really, I mean, I've hardly drawn the trees at all except through hatching. So basically, I'm creating the lights and darks. Just look over here. No, over here. See how I've done the hatching for the tree trunks over here horizontally? And that's so that they stand out, albeit in a subtle way. Again, if I'd done them vertically, they would have got lost in the vertical hatching for the leaves and the foliage around them. So, and again, notice with the barbed wire, I've left a slight gap for just to help us see them, and to get a sense that the wire is very much in front of that wooden support around the small tree to stop the cows pushing it over, I guess, so it can grow. And then you look at the edges of those trees, the silhouette edge of that tree, that close tree, is far more detail than the silhouette edges of, the one behind, and then the ones that are further away. It's really only this pine tree up the back that is both very dark and has an extremely what's the word? Individualistic look to it. But learning to draw trees through hatching is incredibly important. I mean, this was the reference photo for that. So how would you draw that otherwise, trying to get a sense of depth and so forth in it? This is, I think, a nice example of creating a scene by hatching. So who's tried to draw a scene like this? Would you try and draw a scene like this with a multi-liner pen, with a thin black line? I mean, how do you draw this? How do you create this strong sunlight on a Yorkshire laneway? What do you do? Well, this is what I did. And again, you can see very much, I'm not thinking lines, I'm thinking marks. I never think lines anymore, but I do use marks because lines are marks, and they're often essential marks. And with trees, at least with the branches, you use lines a lot. But I find that by thinking marks, I'm trying to put ink on the paper. I'm not trying to draw things. And so I'm trying to create textures and silhouettes and edges and darknesses and lights with marks. And I try and create them so that I can create a certain feel, a certain visual effect. but it comes from my way of thinking. I'm not looking at this thinking, oh, what's that? How do I draw that? I never think, how do I draw that? As in that being a particular object. I just look at the visual effect of what's in front of me. And it works just the same if it's in life, if it's not a photo. And I think what marks will create that effect. And what you don't want is you don't want big dead black spaces. And so down here, you'll notice I've still worked it so that some parts are just a bit darker than others, because that reflects life. And once I stopped trying to draw leaves and just began to see form, so I think of shape as a two-dimensional thing. A square is a shape, but a cube is a form. A circle is a shape, but a sphere is a form. And I find it very helpful to think in those terms. So again, how this is a recent drawing, but how would we draw this? How would you draw this with a line? And especially if you weren't going to draw that blue pole in the front. It's actually a white pole, but it's just the lighting and the printing. But that's about the only thing that you could draw with a line, except maybe that tree trunk. So and how do you capture what's happening here? How do you capture all this shade and shadow and the rock surface and that strappy plant behind and the ground and the different direction that the rock and the ground is in? How would you capture that when you just have a pen? You do it the same way you capture everything. You do it with making marks that when they all come together, create that sense. And you can see, if you go back up the pathway, back up through the light, you can see how I've used very different marks for the leaves on the right-hand side, which are actually one of the closest things that we're seeing. And so I've done individual leaves there for that. And again, you can see though, for the trees that have, or the bushes, whatever is further away, furthest away, I've just used light lines because I just want a sense of the values in the distance. I don't want to do anything that it's the contrast between the closest things and the furthest things that helps create the sense of distance. And right here, I've got the closest and the furthest things of the scene drawn, if you like, on top of each other. And so I want to make sure that the closest thing really feels close, and that it's not that there's no confusion. And so manipulating the lights and darks, and often in terms of our reference, making some shifts, because our reference is in color, and sometimes things are clear in color because of the color. The values are quite similar. And so when we take it to black and white, we lose a lot of the distinction. And sometimes that can make it a bit harder to work out what's happening in the scene. So when I draw it, I put that back in. But again, I mean, this was for a video on hatching, not so much drawing trees. But you can see that we, controlling edges. What edges do I correct? If you look at those worn steps, you can see I haven't drawn a straight line across for the stones, but my guess, if you look at the stones in the reference, my guess is that 90% of you, if you were drawing this, would have drawn a straight line, not straight, but a continuous line across the, if you like, the obvious edge, where the shadow hits the light on those two rocks. And yet it wouldn't have created the weathered effect that we get when we look at the rock. So it's always about capturing the effect, not outlining shapes. If this is interesting, please hit the like button for me. And I have found this shift in my thinking has not just enabled me to draw trees better, but has actually revolutionized my drawing of anything, because I've come to realize, like, I mean, it started with tree, draw the effect of the detail. But I realized that everything we draw the effect of the detail. It's just that the effect is different often with different things. And, some things lend themselves more to, like a car, for instance, is more hard edge. But that doesn't mean that we draw all the edges the same, because different parts of a car, depending on the shape and depending on the lighting on the car and depending on what's behind the car and the value contrast, come across differently. I talked about edges before. This is my reference photo for another fairly recent drawing. Now, again, just look at the stone and the edges of the stone. Now, if you were drawing this, would you draw a straight line, or a continuous line rather, but fairly straight, for these edges? Because that gives a very sharp effect, like it's cut marble or something, that, let's face it, isn't in the reference. So this is what I did. And I like, yeah. Sometimes I'm more pleased with my drawings than others. I was really pleased with the effect I created for these steps. But before I began to draw this, I did just experiment with a couple of the steps on a scrap of paper, which I always do. I've got videos that talk about the importance of doing this. I can't. Well, I didn't hatch the edges. I hatched up to the edge, and I hatched over the edge in some parts to show that because it was an uneven surface, the light was catching the edge differently. I want to get a sense of the roundedness. I'm quite happy to have a few little sharp bits, because the effect in life is that there are some bits of rock that are sort of chipped off, and they do create a bit of a hard edge, or some bits just are a bit harder, but a lot of bits are not, because it's a rounded. It's not about Metal Kid. It's not about copying what I've got here the next time you have stone steps to draw in the bush. It's not, so that's how you do it. It's always about what am I looking at? What's here? Not how did Stephen do it in the thing, but in the steps I'm looking at. And let's say you've got different steps, in the steps I'm looking at, firstly, what's the effect? How rounded, how weathered, how uneven, how chipped, how horizontal or not horizontal are the steps laid? That's what we need to do. We need to see. I spent some time looking at these edges to work out exactly what I was looking at, and that was the starting point for what marks would let me capture the effect of this. And that was the best I worked out, and I was happy with it. I was very happy with it. Makes me want to draw a lot more stone steps. But I actually learned to draw these by hatching tree canopies. It's where I shifted my thinking from trying to draw shapes accurately to trying to, if you like, splash the paper with ink marks that together created a certain effect. I mean, here we see the steps and foliage. We'll just come back to foliage. This is a nice example, I think, because there's so much foliage here, so many different types of foliage. And I drew this both because I like the contrast of the foliage and the steps and the gate. And I think there's lots of really interesting technique things here. And so I'll just point a few of them out. They're not strictly to do with our topic, but I just think they're helpful. But firstly, look at those steps. Okay. Now, I'm still trying to create the sense that these steps, firstly, are weathered generally in the center. So the center of each step dips
because that's where people mostly walk. And that therefore has also rounded the edge as well. Plus, these steps are probably 150 years old as well. So a bit of age and a lot of walking. So I wanted Mark. So even though in effect, these are the straight line parts of the drawing, the effect was very different to the fence, which was more straight line. Now notice that I've actually really drawn the fence more by drawing the darkness on the other side of the fence. So yeah, there is that. But then if we look at the foliage, again, it's looking at the effects. So this sort of thing, these like long, strappy, clumpy things with sword-like leaves that come out like a pom-pom in 360 degrees, they're often a lot of trouble for people to draw. Again, because we look at them and we end up going to some sort of childhood way of drawing instead of saying, this is the same as anything. What am I seeing? And how can I capture that effect? And what I find is really important is to capture a few of the ones that come straight out at you and bend down, and to draw them in first of all, because they block what we see behind. So if we draw the ones that just go straight up first, then we can't draw the ones in front that cover it. So choosing the right order to draw things is really important as well. And as you can see, we have a something similar to this. This is some sort of yucca or flax maybe, and we have something similar in its habitat, but this grows and branches as well. And then we have the grass down the front. And with grass, the most important thing is to get the scale right as the grass moves further away. The ground foreshortens as it moves back, just as much as a wall of windows or columns foreshortens as it moves away. As the ground moves away, it foreshortens. And so the grass that we might see in more detail at the front rapidly becomes invisible as it moves. And drawing too much grass detail as it goes back is a huge common fault in drawings, and it really makes things look cartoon-like. I think I've got 2 or 3 videos on drawing grass. I've got a couple on drawing grass, and I've got a couple on drawing shadows on grass. And both I think very helpful. And grass, if we go back to our childhood drawings of symbols, where's my, if you missed it, our childhood drawings of symbols, then grass is very much I'm just doing some symbolic grass here that I can show you. Then grass is very much something that from cartoons, from comics, we learn, oh, this is how you do grass. And then you just scatter them all over the place like wallpaper. And yeah, and it creates a very flat, very two-dimensional look. Okay, what are my words on drawing river waters, flowing streams and such? Look, I'm not, I'm just pushing back to, there's another drawing here of water that I actually don't have many. No, look, I don't draw water a huge amount. I mean, we do have it in Australia. I've got some photos of waves that I plan to kind of play around with and experiment, but it's always the same thing. No, that's really no good. That's just a little bit of a river, the bottom of the Seine. But the question always is, what's the effect? You see, there's no way to draw something. We draw, and I think the very question shows the thinking that if I can be blunt, shows like, how do you draw this? How do you draw this? Shows the thinking that there are ways to draw things, and therefore there's a technique to use to draw this or that. And this is how patterns develop. This is how symbols are used, because everything is always different. And so we don't see things the same way, even on different days. The same thing, different time of the day, it looks different, let alone different things of the same type. And it's always, what am I looking at now, or what am I wanting to draw now, and visually, what effect does it have in reality, and how can I capture that effect? It's always. And so how I do a river, if the river's flat and there's bright light on it, might be very different to how I do it if it's churning in flood and it's very late in the day. The sun's very low rather than very high. And the techniques, the marks, the time it might take to draw the river at one point can be totally different in almost every way at another point. It's always, Metal Kid, I tell you what would really work for you would be to just grab lots of shots of running water, if this is something you want to learn to do better, and experiment. And experiment, don't do drawings. When in our mind we do a drawing, there is this pressure often to have an artwork, that this is going to be an artwork, so therefore I have to not make mistakes. Nothing will stop us from experimenting and discovering wonderful things about drawing and mark making than being afraid of making mistakes. Look, if someone hasn't paid you to do it, then it's everything's experimenting, everything's learning, and we should feel free to experiment and take risks and explore marks and possibilities of marks. This is something I wanted to show you. If you've never done this, you really should. Oh gosh, it's just been sitting here the whole time until now that I want it. So here it is. Here it is. And that's this. I did a video some time ago on different marks to create different effects for leaves for different trees. Yes, there it is. And so I was deliberately playing around with what marks create foliage at different types of foliage in different lighting conditions. Sorry, I'm moving it around so much. And this is what I came up with. And it's a great exercise to do, because it also gets out of our head that there's a set way to draw leaves, rather than I need to learn to see the overall effect, if you like, the main visual effect, and then I need to have a lot of different types of marks and ways of combining those marks, so that I can bring those to life. And here is a picture of a tree. Now, this looks like that's it. This looks like I've drawn different trees together, but this is actually from a photo from down the road where all these trees are growing close together, and you can see them in the one. I didn't even slide them close up together. So this is actually a life kind of grab view, but the different marks trying to create a different effect, and the fact that this tree here is actually some distance further back than the other ones. Just finished my cup of coffee. Yeah. And this is why it's so important. I mean, the trees do look very different. I mean, this one down here, we've even kind of partly created this one by the silhouette of the darkness behind. So this is why thinking marks. So it's not how do I draw a tree, because what I'm going to tell you for this tree isn't going to be much help for this tree, and would lead you astray for another tree. This is another personal favorite drawing, but if we look at, like, how do I draw a tree? Well, what's the effect of the tree? Is it in front of things or is it behind things? Do we see that the edges clearly or not? How important is it to the overall scene as well? All of these things. What do we do when we have leaves in front of a dark trunk and the leaves are light? How do we draw that? Well, it's the same way we draw everything. We look at what we're trying to capture, we look at the effect we want, and we work out what marks will do that. And then we have to work out whether we want to do the drawing or not, if those marks are going to take a lot of time and be a lot of work, and we don't have that time or we don't want to do that work. So, it's why I partly draw smaller now, because when you have a lot of lines to put on the paper, it's good if the paper's not too large. And so again, it's like it's working out all of these different factors. How large am I drawing? I very rarely draw, the big drawings that I very rarely draw the big drawings that I used to draw, for a number of reasons. Partly that the videos were too long and had to be sped up too much, but partly because I realized how much I was learning doing all these drawings. And I realized that as a teacher, that learning them in that I could learn just as much in a, if you like, 20-minute lesson as in a 2-hour lesson. Only I could have 4 20-minute lessons in 2 hours, or 5 or 6, 6 20-minute lessons in 2 hours, and learn, 4 or 5 or 6 times as much. And that encouraged me to go smaller, and also the fact that I had more stamina to complete a smaller drawing. And you only learn everything you're going to learn by completing the drawing. You might have heard me say that there are lots of skills that we only need, and therefore we only develop them in the second half of the drawing. See, it's not just about drawing this and drawing this step and drawing this tree and drawing this thing in the distance and drawing these rocks here and what marks will create that. It's also about, at the end of the drawing, where are the lights and darks that are going to make this dramatic? What are the key things that create the feel, and how prominent are they in the reference? How prominent do I want them to be in my drawing, and are they? It's where we make adjustments over the values. It's where we put the darkest darks in. It's sometimes when we realize that this area is not quite right, and so we adjust it. And again, if you look at my drawing videos, sometimes you'll see, and I think in yesterday's video I do this, or the day before, one of the two. After I take the tape off, if I put tape around, after I take the tape off, sometimes you'll see me come back with the pen and just make a couple of areas a little bit darker. And that's because without the tape, I've looked at my drawing again and thought, yeah, just needs a bit of tweaking here and here. And that's a skill. That's a skill that we develop, as in the case with all our skills, as we do it. But if we never get more than halfway or 3/4 of the way through our drawing, then we never reach the point where we need that skill, so we never develop it. So I can really recommend that. This is, I don't know whether I pushed it too far, but how would you draw this with a multi-liner and hope to capture a sense of it's like an explosion of foliage coming towards us, isn't it? And that tree coming out of the back. But I saw it, I took the photo, and look, the truth is this would probably make a better painting than a nice dramatic painting than a drawing. But I'd just done a few like this, and I was feeling gung ho. So that was how it turned out. But it is also good at whatever level we're at to push ourselves into trying things and to look. It's generally not helpful to go beyond what we have a chance of doing. Okay, so I'm not saying if you do something really hard, that will help. It can actually be damaging. You can get into all sorts of bad habits and just get discouraged as well. And certainly spend an hour drawing and not learn anything helpful, but learn a few things you might need to unlearn. But whatever level you're at,
and it's always helpful to have a sense of what level am I at. And I do have a video on working out what level you might be at. Whatever level you're at, sometimes it's good just to push a few steps up and just to see, you know, what's involved drawing this. Is it something I'm aware of or not? Can I do it or not? A few comments here. Let's have a look. What do I think about mixing black and gray when creating marks? Thanks, Joe, for those nice comments. Roki, yeah, look, there are no rules. There are no rules. I mean, I often think, you know, I should buy some black, some gray multi-liners. I don't even know whether Copic make them. I haven't tried to find them. So if I wanted to do that, I'd have to get them in different brands if they don't, but they possibly do. Maybe someone knows. Does Copic make multi-liners in several shades of gray? Yeah, look, because I mean, in a sense, I try and create that effect by using finer pens, but you could create it by using grayscale and actual gray pen as well. In fact, it might be more effective as well. So why not? There's no reason why I haven't, except I haven't, and I'm just busy drawing the things I draw. Which part do I start with when drawing trees? Battle Kid, watch the, that's true. It's the leaves mostly. I always start with the canopy. It's just where do I start with the canopy? So if I were drawing this, I would I'd start here with this line here, and I'd start with drawing this part, and that's really echoing the same way it is with architecture, where generally I start with a part that's going to be easy to get in proportion, but if possible, also more central. That's not always possible, but if it is something more central, because that way I work up, I work down, and I work out. And if I'm a little inaccurate in my proportions, then it doesn't go as far. But if I start down here and I go up and my proportions are a little bit off, then by the time I get to the top, they've had this much travel to get off, to become more wrong than this much. And so it has a bigger effect overall. So I tend to do, but I would have started here and here, and then I would have gone up. And that way too, I establish what my marks will look like for the closest part of this tree, because, you know, sometimes it's like here or here is closer than here. It just depends on the tree. Probably actually here and here are a bit closer than that. Yeah, and so drawing the closest things first means that I know how dark my marks are for that. I just jumped up again because I'm just rummaging. I want to show you something that I've got here. But I don't know whether. Yeah, here we go. Metal Kid just said, "How about a steam train?" This went past our back fence a couple of weekends ago. So I've been just playing around. I've never drawn a steam train, and this was just my first playing around take. But this is part of how, I mean, I do plan to draw this at some stage, or a different photo of the same day, because the train went back and forth a few times. I have a few photos, but I'm still just trying to get a better grasp of understanding the way a steam train is put together, and just the engineering of it and the shapes and that. So, but yeah, there may be. Oh, Michael, that's very kind. Thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate that very much. I have to understand proportions to see where I go. Yeah, look, proportions are always a challenge. And oh, look, I like boats more. I mean, I was a Titanic nut when I was a kid. I read A Night to Remember when I was about, I don't know, 8 or 9.
and yeah, absolutely, absolutely loved it. And so I probably should draw the Titanic. Well, I have, but as a kid, but as an adult. Thank you, Michael. That's great. Yeah. So that I don't know whether other people can see that Michael just gave me some thank you money. So thank you very much. Yeah, yeah. But it is good. It is good to go with different subjects sometimes, whatever our sweet spot is, whatever we like to draw. If I never draw portraits, it's good to draw a portrait occasionally. If I never draw steam trains, it's good to draw a steam train occasionally. If I never do a bunch of flowers, it's good to do a bunch of flowers because the skills are the same. I actually don't think it's harder to draw one thing versus anything else because the skills are the same. It's just what surface and forms and effects of light and dark that are created by those surfaces and forms are changed, but the tool we have is exactly the same as ink on paper, pen on paper, pencil on paper, watercolor on paper, whatever, is exactly the same. And the skill of seeing something and working out what marks will create those effects are the same. So why not have a go? Just because I think when we look at something that we're not so familiar with the subject. So I mean, I might be familiar with faces to look at, but not to draw. I have to look and find things that I don't normally see, and that's incredibly helpful in helping me learn to observe. So all of these things I think are helpful, are important. And and sometimes when we draw the same thing over and over again, we can actually start to slip into symbols. We can actually start to slip into starting to depict the things in a non-representational way. Maybe it represented an actual tree we drew in the past that we liked, and so we've let that technique kind of stay in places where it shouldn't, in drawings where it shouldn't. But again, once I start looking at shape, and I'll show you one of my favorite drawings that I've done, maybe the favorite drawing that I've done, and that was this one. And it's probably partly because I know the people in this Swiss forest. But how would you draw that? Is that something you'd think you could draw with a black pen, fine line? How would you get the effect of not so much the trees in the front, because we can probably think, well, that'd be time consuming to do, but you could kind of do those dark shapes. But how do we create the sense of the grass, but more importantly, the sense of those trees that are in the midground, catching the light, and then the detail of the trees behind? How do I capture that effect? And please hit the like button if you're watching and you haven't already. And this was my take on it. And like it can look a little obvious when you see what someone else has done. It's not quite so obvious. Hang on, I'm just trying to work it so that I just don't do well with the mirrored thing. But these are the marks that I found. And again, though, if you were just to look at, if we were to cut out a small part of this and blow it up, there's every chance, depending what part we cut out and blew up, that you wouldn't know what it was, because the marks don't make any sense about being a tree in a forest, except in this context with the other marks all around it. And you see, this is why when people say, oh, show me how to draw this, it does indicate, I think, an unhelpful way of thinking, because there is no way to draw this. It's how do I draw that particular thing? How do I capture, what marks will capture that effect? And as I said, if we cut a little bit out, it won't be clear that it's anything at all, let alone a pine tree, a fir tree in a forest. Thanks, Anton. Yeah, and learning, like Anton saying he can't draw the same thing over and over again. Um, um, and when you do have a scene like this, the hardest thing I find personally, the real challenge for me with something where there is a lot of repetitive line work, whether it's that or this or this or this, if there's a lot of repetitive line work, is that we switch onto autopilot and we drop into the zone, especially if we have music on, or we're listening to a podcast or something, and we end up doing not three times, but we end up doing half as many lines again as we should do. And we lose, it's preserving the paper that is the challenge, even for me anyway, even more than the marks I put on the paper. It's the marks I don't put on the paper. It's the paper that I leave clear that allows people to see what it is. It's the breathing space between things. Well, thank you, Claude. That's very kind of you, as well. Really appreciate that. Yeah, that's what matters. That's the thing that we have to keep our concentration for, knowing when to stop and not losing the sense of randomness. Like just going back to this one, say, if you were to look at my reference photo, you might have thought I would have put more marks in here. But I had to work really hard not to, and to even not put as many marks as could have been suggested by the reference, because this kind of light space draws the eye, and combined with, this grass, this clump that's close, and then going up the stairs, and then going up the stairs, and the stairs don't lead into this space, they kind of lead that way, but visually there's this link from kind of one place further up. And so it's that light space is really important. And I had to work really hard to not put any extra lines in there and to really keep them light, the ones I did. And a lot of nature is random, is asymmetrical, but there's something in us that wants to make it all look the same. And if I'm not keeping really alert as I do the last marks, I can in 2 minutes I can put enough lines on the paper to totally undercut all the effect I've just spent an hour carefully creating. So easy to do. So easy to do. And when I mentioned earlier about if we never finish our drawings, we don't learn the skills that we need to learn to complete a drawing, because we don't get practice finishing drawings to learn them. This is one of the really important skills, that it's knowing how to control the marks towards the end. When we've done a lot, in some ways they almost become second nature. We could do them in our sleep, and the problem is we go to sleep and we keep drawing, and we as I said, we either overdraw things and make them look heavy and wooden and stiff, or we simply just put too many marks on the paper that take away the gaps that let us understand what's happening. And so it just becomes a tangled mess. And there's nothing worse than realizing that the drawing looked much better 2 minutes ago, and there's nothing we can do about it right at the minute anymore. That is terrible. This is a nice little drawing. Just we talked about before of doing different marks for different types of trees, different types of foliage, and creating a sense of separation. And we do it both with the marks we use and with the values, with the lights and darks that we create, and with the detail that we draw. So these little box hedges that we have in the front, this is taken in the gardens of Versailles, up around Marie Antoinette's dairy farm. And we have different types of trees here, and we have some different trees in the distance, some of which I forget whether it was spring or autumn. I think it was spring. So some of the trees hadn't yet come into their foliage fully. but it's finding different marks, even when the objects might look relatively similar. We still, because we don't have color, we can't capture that in quite the same way. And so we're still trying to find marks that will allow that to happen. But look, with this little house here, or part of a house that we can see, it's the same. What marks will create the feel of that building, not the actual building. I've mentioned these sort of clumpy, strappy plants before, but this is actually quite a good. Now this drawing took me like 10 minutes to do. This part of this was that it was a really quick drawing. I think I drew it in 5 minutes, and then I drew it in 10 or maybe 15 minutes. And this is the longer drawing, but it was still very fast. And you can see what I've done. The first thing I've drawn is I've drawn the leaves that come forward, because they hide what's behind. So I don't want to draw what's behind, because then I can't draw these. But these are the ones, because of the shadows that usually is cast around the base, actually define what's happening. So I want to make sure I get that sense. So Anton does too much detail. Yeah, and that's really common. But it's great that you understand it. And the question is, how can you lessen the detail that you do? Because I think I was talking about this at the start, but we want our drawings to finish up with well, it hasn't got to be the same visual impact as our reference, because part of being an artist is that we have artistic license, and we can improve on our photo. Photos can have all sorts of weaknesses that we don't need to put into our drawings. So I'm not saying we need to do it the same, but the starting point, our reference is our starting point. And then we can make adjustments to create a more dynamic, a better composed, and more dramatic drawing. For a first try, I recommend a LMS Ginty. Yes, sorry, I have no idea what an LMS Ginty is. The thing is, though, I only draw from my own photos, or occasionally photos from friends because of copyright things. Because if I draw from someone else's photo without their permission, that's actually a copyright infringement. The photography is regarded as a creative endeavor. And if I start if I start my creative drawing from where their creativity finished its expression, then I've used their creativity in my drawing. Now, we can, I think under copyright law, you can use things for educational purposes, but educational purposes, I don't know, let you sell them or even post them on social media. That's sort of going beyond. So if you want to draw someone else's photos, make sure you ask their permission. And can I say, most people will be flattered, so, but it's important that we respect other creative people's copyright privileges as we would like ours to be respected. We don't want to go to a local souvenir shop and find some of our drawings are plastered all over cards and tea towels and we knew nothing about, and someone else is making money from our drawings, or our artwork. So I think that's important to realize too. Claude's going to try drawing the train. Okay. I've got 100 drawings here, but sometimes I think this is when it's even more helpful to be comfortable with foliage. Is the foliage is not the main event by any stretch, and yet it has to be there for the bird. And so being able to draw, actually I've got the photo here, like that's a pretty complex scene of foliage. So being able to simplify it in a way that creates a feel for what was there is really helpful. So you can see I've tried to draw the effect. It's a good example, actually. I've tried to draw the effect of the reference without drawing all the detail. And so That background maybe took me 7 or 8 minutes to draw from start to finish. But I think I've managed to capture the effect. But I've also managed to tone down the visual impact of the background so that the star stays the star, so that it doesn't compete too much with the subject. And that's important too. That's an important consideration as well. I've given Anton a spark. Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah. Look, I agree. I think it does. I think it really does. And just as something a bit different as I guess we finish up. So please hit the like button if you're still here and you haven't. But this is my only Swiss Mountain drawing, but I really enjoyed doing it. But there is foliage. There is this fir tree here where the silhouette is really important. And notice how I did these branches with vertical lines. It would have been much quicker to have gone with my pen, much quicker than, and a little more effort to control my lines so that I created the silhouette that I wanted. And yet it wouldn't have created the same effect. It would have been a more cartoon-like effect because those marks wouldn't have captured the visual effect of the pine needles kind of, I think they go, look, I don't even know whether they go up stiffly or whether they hang down loosely. Fir trees aren't really very common in Australia at all, but wouldn't have captured the effect in the reference. But then also on this side, there was this tangle of undergrowth that was really close. And then there was some more kind of shrubby things further back. And it's obviously, well, actually it was summer. So even though there's snow here on the mountains, it was summer. But notice I've drawn the snow by simply not drawing anything there. And so again, the gaps where we don't put lines, we have to be so controlled. But, this isn't about hatching, but you can see I've actually created the sense of form of the mountains by my hatching lines and directions, and by letting my hatch lines follow the underlying form of the rock and also the underlying direction in terms of a sense of perspective and perspective angles. Do I always have a reference picture or do I sometimes just wing it? I always have a reference picture because that's how I draw. But I don't necessarily keep to it strictly. So I believe, sometimes I do keep to it more strictly than others, but is there one more person who can hit the like button? Get me over 50. That would be great. I certainly never feel limited by the reference. And so one of the first things in looking at a reference is, why am I wanting to draw this? And whatever appeals to me, how can I strengthen it in some way? Can I do something to make that stronger or not? Do I want to rearrange things? Sometimes I'll take something out, or I'll move a person or I'll just take out a lamppost or a street sign, or I don't know, something. And if you do that, depending on how large it is, you have to obviously recreate what you can't see. And so there's that. But look, I did say I was going to talk about imagination versus drawing from references. Look, personally, everyone's free to do whatever works for them. There are no rules. It's just what works. But the way I understand the process of drawing and of drawing from our imagination is that when I draw from my imagination, like when I draw from a reference, it's here. I draw from this. Well, it's there in front of me. Or the reference, in a sense, could be life. Life drawing, we're still looking at a reference. It's just that it's a three-dimensional reference rather than a two-dimensional reference. What happens when I draw from my imagination? Let's say I want to draw a parrot sitting on a branch. I've drawn a tree and I want to put a parrot what do I do? Well, I go back and I remember parrots that I've seen. Or I remember photos of parrots that I've seen. And hopefully I've seen lots and lots of them. And I've remembered them being realistic to different degrees. And I think of them like being, I then file them in my brain. I have I have a parrot filing drawer where I put all the parrot memories. And when I go to draw from my imagination, if I want to draw a parrot, I go to the parrot filing drawer, pull it out, and I rummage through my references to work out how does a parrot look sitting on this branch. And then I draw it. So I don't really draw from my imagination. I actually draw from my memories that I use to create a parrot that's going to look realistic. Now, I can only do that to the degree I have filed away memories that are accurate enough and useful enough and perhaps in enough volume for me to reference and remember. Otherwise, I'm just making up a bird, some sort of generic bird, or I'm just guessing. And when I see drawings from imagination, I think often it's very clear that there's been a lot of guesswork about, say, what the perspective angles look like and so forth, because there isn't a sense of reality. For someone who knows that subject well, can see straight away there's an awkwardness in how it's been drawn. And so I would say that if someone's learning to draw, drawing from imagination for the learning to draw period is probably not helpful, because the observation we need for life is not the same as what we need for drawing. And the observation we need for drawing is so much more focused and in lots of ways exact than what we need, than what we get away with in life. And so we think we've seen something well because we have seen it well enough for all the purposes we've needed it for, right up until the point we go to draw it. And then we don't know that we haven't actually seen it. I mean, like, to tell you the truth, so many drawings I see, my drawing students, it's quite clear they haven't been able to look at the reference carefully enough to see the key things they have to see to draw it accurately. So if we struggle to do that when the reference is right here, inches from our drawing pen, then how much harder is it to actually be trying to find this same form from our memories of maybe 50 photos or scenes of parrots that we've seen, and we're trying to find one that is right and approximate. Now, of course, it can be done, but it's so much easier to do it if we've really pumped the right memories into our imagination, into our mind that we can refer to. And the best way to learn what a subject looks like accurately enough to draw it well is to draw it from life, or to draw it from a reference over and over and over and over again in all sorts of different positions. And then we will really be making sure we're putting into our head all the information we need to be able to go in there and maybe find the parrot and rotate it into the position we want, and have a good sense of how all the different parts of the parrot, from the beak down to the tail feather and the claws, will look from different positions. The problem is when most people try to draw from their imaginations, they haven't put enough information into their mind so that they can find that. Is it also the same for making fantasy? It doesn't matter. Yeah, I'm still. I mean, if I'm creating something that doesn't exist in real life, so I'm not trying to draw an actual parrot. I'm trying to maybe draw a bird-like creature, then that's a bit different. But I'm still going to my memories of birds and maybe flowers and a few other things that I think I can, there's some element of those other things that I can combine to create a bird-like thing. I'm still going back into my mind and to memories and to things I've seen and things I've thought worked well, or if it's a fantasy architecture, it's the same thing. I may well be going back to memories of other people's fantasy architecture. I loved science fiction paperbacks in the 70s when I was a teenager, and I used to love the cover art of the books that were in the late 60s, but mostly through the 70s, where the fantasy buildings, the fantasy space stations and things were hugely of interest to me. I wasn't drawing it myself, but I was appreciating what other people were doing. Metal Kid, what are you saying? Yes, remember when I asked about coming up with canopies, leaf forms and such? Yeah. Yes, it's the same with that, with drawing from imagination. The best thing you can do is to, I don't know, where do you live, Metal Kid? What sort of trees do you have around you? Are you in Australia? Do you have gum trees? But whatever you think the sort of trees are you want to draw from your imagination, find those trees in life and draw them over and over and over again, and draw them from different distances, draw them from different positions, draw them, find if you've got a tree near you, take photos of it at different times of the day with different light, take photos of it from different distances, do your drawings different sizes. So do some of your drawings this size, but do some of them this size as well, because that pushes us to find different marks to create a similar effect. The scale with which we draw something is hugely influential in how we draw something. You're in Brazil, right? Yeah, well, last time I heard there's a rainforest in Brazil. There's lots of trees in Brazil, and there's lots of parrots too. Although, do you know that Australia has more parrots than South America has? We have 58 different parrots, and 51 of them are only found in Australia. But mind you, Brazil has some incredible parrots. I do know that. I like birds, so I do pay attention to bird things. But I was very surprised to learn that we have 58 parrots here in Australia, and at least a dozen of them visit our yard at different stages of the year. So yeah, you can possibly hear them in the background in some of my voiceovers, some of my talking to camera videos. Yeah, okay. We do, and we have a lot of them in our yard sometimes. we had a goanna in our yard. We have eastern brown snakes, second deadliest snake in the world, and we have the Sydney funnel web spider in our yard, the deadliest spider in the world. But you get used to them. We've had a bushfire in our yard too, so there you go. Yeah, but yeah, no, it's a wonderful place. I feel so privileged. And we have trees. We have a national park, a wilderness area that's very close as well. So yeah, and maybe that's why I like drawing these scenes of bush pathways and things, because I walk up and down them quite a lot. Okay, look, is there any desperate question or topic for a live session that anyone wants to just quickly throw on now? There's 13 of you there, 12 of you there. Quick, before you all go, any topics or thoughts for, I mean, I've got a few lined up for the next couple of sessions. A reminder, what I'm trying to do is to do basically the same topic twice in the week. I do Sunday night my time, which kind of is accessible to half the world when they're not sleeping. And then I do Thursday morning my time, which is this one, which is meant to be more compatible for the Americas. So I hope I've got those time zones. Trees in the dark. I'm just trying to find. I've actually got this scene at the moment that this is a black and white shot of a pathway near where I live, and it's actually quite dark. In life, you didn't see these light patches, but the camera kind of opened up and pulled a lot more light into areas that were darker. But so I do have a and here's a darker version of the same. So yeah, I've just been playing around with some night scenes. Well, look, it's the same as everything else. People say, how do I draw things at night? or with lots of dark. Well, it's exactly the same as drawing things in the day. I mean, this is in the day, but it was obviously a dark spot because of the vegetation and where the sun was and the time of year. It's winter here, so the sun was low as well. But it's like it's all to do with controlling the ink we put on the paper to create a certain effect. Now, to do a night scene, we're going to have obviously more ink on the paper. Okay, and look, maybe it's something that becomes something that that in the end sketch marker, like, I mean, here's a tree created a very different way, but maybe to do a night effect, this is the way to go. I've used all the same principles, the building in the distance, the things closer, the edges and whatnot, but instead of hatching my main values, I've used sketch marker, which is another wonderful way to draw. It's just what way do we want to draw? But I like the idea of drawing with a pen. I'll just show you something before we go. This is an earlier bush drawing, so you know I've been doing ones that I feel are quite successful in being able to work out what was happening. But this was one. I've got a video that goes with this, but I look at this now, and to me, there's not enough sense of depth. I hadn't developed my ability. So this was probably 18 months ago. I hadn't developed my ability to kind of create separation. And I look at this now, and it doesn't have as much sense of kind of reality that these marks create. And so I was happy enough with this 18 months ago to post it on YouTube, how to draw video. But I look at it now, and I realized the sheer practice I've had drawing foliage, but particularly drawing this sort of scene has where it lets me now, I think, draw. And look, this is probably a halfway one where I was moving in the right direction. I'm still exploring it. So bonsai tree, well, it's sort of going to just be the same, but it would be an interesting topic. But again, I've got to have some photos. But I guess I could just go to a nursery and take photos of their bonsais that are for sale. That's probably what I should do. Yeah, I had thought of bonsai before. It would make a nice sort of like short video. Yeah. Okay, look, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Thanks for getting involved in the chat. And if this is a good time for you, then I'm hoping to make hoping to make this a regular time. So 8 a.m. Thursday morning Sydney time was when this started. So whatever that time is for you, or put notifications on. That's the other way. For pens, I recommend the pens are the ones that you can afford to waste and to use up without a moment's thought. Nothing is less conducive to developing our art skills than having materials that we're afraid to use up because they're too expensive, they're too precious. We don't want to waste them. We have to, when we're learning, we have to waste what we're using. So the most important thing is use pens that you don't have to think or worry about. That being said, I use Copic pens, not because they pay me, not because I thought they were the best. They just happened to be the ones when I thought, I'm going to switch from pencil to pen. I went to the art shop, I bought these, and I liked them, and I've kept using them. So that's what I use. And generally, I use the 0.3 and the 0.2 millimeter pens are my workhorse pens. I reckon 95% of all the pen I've put on the paper has come from those two pens, but I do use a 0.5 and a 0.1 on occasions for extreme distance or really stronger things in the foreground, if that's helpful. Copic IC. There you go. Copic multi-liner. And people ask why I have the tape on. Sometimes when I refill a pen, change the nib, put a new ink in, I'll put tape on it just so I know that's the new one. That's the one with the nice, heavy, thick black line. So it's nothing special. People also ask me about the tape. So when I do a drawing that I know is going to go right to the edges. I tape around it the way a watercolorist might tape it. And people ask, "Oh, what's that?" I'm just trying to find one of the. Here they are. Look, it's just tape that I buy from the Australian equivalent of Home Depot. It's just that the national hardware chain. It's low adhesive tape that they actually sell for when you're painting, like to put around window frames or on glass or something, to mask or skirting boards so that the paint doesn't get in areas you don't want it to do. So it's simply a low adhesive tape. So it's designed that you can peel it off without damaging what's underneath. Do need to be a little bit careful when you take it off, like peel very slowly. And I certainly have torn lots of sheets of paper by being impatient. One trick you can use, people have told me, is to use a hairdryer and a portable hairdryer and just to heat the tape before you lift it. It just softens the glue, especially on the bit of tape that's along the bottom, because your hand often rests on that more, and so it presses it down, so it's more likely to stick. Unfortunately, we don't have a portable hairdryer here, so I haven't been able to use that. But so I just go very slowly. But it's not expensive. It's about the cheapest material that I use. And if you're interested in the paper that I use, people ask me. It's an Australian brand made from German paper. It's 210 GSM. It's a relatively smooth surface, but not perfectly smooth. But it's more smooth than not. And it's too smooth for watercolor, but it's good for ink and for marker ink as well. Stick it to your shirt and get some lint on it before. Yeah, thanks, Michael. I've heard that too. Yes, you can refill these pens. These you can refill as well. The Copic, the sketch markers that I use, and you can refill them by pulling out one of them and dropping the ink into it, and then just putting that. And you buy the ink separately, so that's an ink tube. So you need to have ink for whatever number of. I think I basically use 7 values from N0 to N6. And so if I have ink on hand, I can always refill these. But you can also buy replacements for Copic. With the multi-liners, it's a bit different. It's as I said, look, Copic don't pay me, so they don't give me stuff. Anyone from Copic watching? But you can buy replaceable inks, and you can also buy replacement nibs. And I just like the fact that I can have them on hand, so that I know that I'm never going to be caught short if I'm halfway through a drawing and a pen runs out. I like the predictability that gives me, that I'll always have, except for the time, I don't know if you saw that reel I did, but I needed a 0.3 nib, and I had none, but I had 11.2 nibs. Isn't that the way it is with art supplies? Yeah. So, okay, I don't know Sysgraph, but look, I just buy it all from my art supply shop. So, ask. But look, they're not cheap. They're often amongst the most expensive ones. As I said, I didn't realize that when I started to buy it, because it was just what was there, and I just bought it. But they're not necessarily cheap. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Goodness, 2 hours, 20 minutes. Certainly time to wrap this up. If you haven't hit the like button, please do. And as I said, 8 a.m. next Thursday, I hope to be here again. So why not hit the like button? Well, it was about trees mostly. Where's a picture of a tree we can end with? Here's trees and architecture. You've probably seen this before, but again, it's looking at different marks to show different foliage is what's important in a scene like this. And some of the foliage is emphasized through negative shape because of dark spaces around, and some of them are emphasized by dark silhouette, and some of them are something in between. And so it's using this is where we do need to go beyond the photo, because very often in the photo, it's actually color that creates some of this definition. And I have to be prepared to creatively come up with ways of substituting for the color to maintain the, I want it to be a sense of tangle of vegetation, but I also want the separation of the different plant elements to come out as well. But, plant matter is such an incredible, wonderfully effective contrast to architecture that we have. And so it's really worth the effort. Yep. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Maybe see you this time next week. Bye.